Hey, Chris Seiter here, and today I'm making this video to teach you what your ex is thinking about if they don't contact you. But first, if you're new to this process and you're wanting to get your ex back, I would always recommend that you stop by our website and take our Ex Recovery Chances quiz. It's a simple 2-minute quiz designed to help you understand if this is worth your time or even if you have a chance of getting your ex back. Taking the quiz is super simple. All you have to simply do is look in the description link below this YouTube video. You click on that and it will take you right to where you can take the quiz. So with that in mind, take the quiz again. Let's begin.
So what is your ex thinking about if you don't hear from them? This is a really big question that I get asked all the time, and I'm going to unpack it here for you today. But before I dive in, I want to quickly remind you that it's really important for you to take our Ex Recovery Chances quiz. Now, I keep reiterating this video after video, podcast after podcast, article after article, because ultimately it gives you your starting point. It tells you and answers the question if this is worth your time or not. And it's a big deal. And sometimes even if you get a low score on our quiz, we'll teach you exactly what you can do to raise that score. So with that in mind, make sure you go take the quiz. Let's begin talking about what the heck is going on in your ex's head. And, truthfully, I would actually argue that there's a more important question that we need to ask first before we ultimately answer this question, right? So what is that question? Well, that question is your ex even thinking about you at all? This is a big question I get, especially from people who are new to the process or going through the no contact rule for the first time, where they're ignoring their ex and they're frightened to death that all of a sudden their ex is just going to forget them. So, is your ex even thinking about you at all? Well, definitively, yes. I would actually make a really strong argument that they are thinking about you. It's really hard to forget someone that you potentially spend a month to years of your life with. Romantically, intimately. It's hard to forget those details. And I've actually got some scientific backing behind this. So let's actually look at that. What is the scientific backing that proves that your ex is still thinking about you? Well, actually, there's two reasons. The first one is a little bit more scientific, and the second one is actually a study done by a graduate student on breakups. So what are these two things? Well, the first thing, as you can see here, is addiction, right? So what they found when scientists were studying the brain and how it reacts to breakups is they actually put a number of individuals and hooked them up to an MRI machine, which can scan your brain and show some imaging of what's going on there. And what they did is they picked people who had just gone through breakups. So these are people who were on the cusp of having been broken up, and they showed that person images of their ex. And what they found the brain did was really fascinating. They found that the part of the brain that became very active was actually the same part of the brain that became active in a cocaine addict. When a cocaine addict is looking for that fix, they need something to keep them going. So if you really think about it, after you go through a breakup, this is why it's so hard to get over the person, because in a way, your body is hungering for some type of stimulus from your ex. You're addicted to them. So obviously, I'm sure you're going through that because, hey, you're watching my YouTube channel or you're listening to this podcast or what have you. You are addicted to your ex. You cannot stop thinking about him or her. But the same is also true of your ex. They are going to not be able to stop thinking about you either, because they're also addicted in a weird way. They're also going through some pain. Now, we can get into what they're thinking about a little bit later, but before I do that, first let's move on to the second reason that I believe that your ex is thinking about you. So the second reason is actually the idea of Facebook creeping. So what is that, Facebook creeping? Well, Facebook creeping is actually after a breakup, you basically stalk your ex on Facebook. You're looking at their profile pictures, their image updates, everything you can possibly imagine you're looking at. And a graduate student a couple of years ago did a test where I think it was I think her name was like Isabel or something like that. She actually went around to her college and started quizzing people and asked them if they would spy on their ex after a breakup, and she found that 89% of people said yes. So right there, you've got two scientific facts, two scientific evidences that we can point at and basically say, yes, it's hard to stop thinking about your ex. On the one hand, you're addicted to them. On the other hand, lots of people Facebook creep on their exes, and if they're Facebook creeping, it stands to reason that they're also thinking about their exes. So with that in mind, let's move on. Let's move on to the bigger question, the ultimate question that we're trying to answer here, and that is, what the heck are they thinking, especially if they don't contact you? What's going on in your ex's brain? Well, I'm going to unpeel the layers like an onion here. Hopefully you don't cry. And the first thing I want to talk about here, the first thing that you'll notice, behavior I noticed from my own experience, is this idea of the pendulum. Now, I haven't talked a lot about this. This is something I usually say for coaching clients, but hey, guess what? You're special, and in a weird way, I'm kind of coaching you. So what do I mean by this pendulum thing? Well, you're familiar with what a pendulum is. It swings from left to right, and it just keeps going left to right, left to right. I've often found that after a breakup, people, especially exes, will go through this pendulum of emotions, where 1 minute they're giving you signals that they want to get back together, and the next minute they hate you and think you're the scum of the earth. And they just kind of move on the pendulum from left to right to left to right. And this is very common, especially if you don't hear from them. They're sometimes undergoing this internal battle where they're wanting to reach out to you sometimes, and then the next minute they remember all of the reasons for why they shouldn't reach out to you and why they hate you. And it just keeps going back and forth, and nothing ultimately gets done except they're having this internal battle within themselves. And that's the pendulum. And I've often found that this is a behavior that seems universal to people who have been broken up with and people who have done the breaking up with. It's universal. You're going through probably moments like that where you're 1 minute wanting him back or her back so bad you're willing to do almost anything. And the next minute you're just thinking, this is dumb. Why should I want them back when they did X, Y, or Z to me? And you just go through this pendulum of emotions. And the interesting thing I've found is that if you can use the imagery of this pendulum swinging from left to right, and at first the pendulum is swinging left to right with a very, very great frequency. It's just going left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right. But over time, it kind of slows down, right? So there's not as much of the crazy left to right emotions going on until eventually, when enough time goes by, it stops. And I've found that seems to be the case, and that's something that probably your ex is going through as we are speaking. So the second big thing that I see exes thinking about after a breakup is actually the fact that they believe that you're going to have to be the one to talk to them first, right? This is especially true if you're doing something like a no contact rule. It's the stubborn aspect of themselves. Now, I actually can certainly raise my hand here and say I'm guilty of this. All of the time I would think when I'd go through a breakup, she's got to contact me. I'm not going to be the one to reach out to her. And in a weird way, when I would stay stubborn and then eventually my ex would reach out to me, I would feel in a weird way that I won. Like, okay, she's thinking about me more than I'm thinking about her because she's acting on her wants and her emotions and her needs. And I'm disciplined and I'm not doing that. And that lowers her value in my mind. It's a weird way of thinking, a very stubborn way of thinking, but I found sometimes in the no contact rule, people are freaking out when they don't hear from their exes. And most of the time what happens when they don't hear from their exes is they're having this mentality. Their ex is literally thinking they're going to have to contact me first. And probably the best example I can use of this is Jessie, one of our success stories, who did the no contact rule and her ex didn't reach out to her. She's having these exact thoughts where she's worrying that he's forgetting about her or he's not thinking about her. And ultimately what ended up happening is she ended up being the one to reach out to him, and she goes on to find out later, now that they are married, spoiler alert, they got married and got back together, he goes on to tell her that, yeah, I was having this stubborn streak where I was not going to be the first one to reach out to you. And what I find is probably the most concrete truth I can give you is it doesn't matter so much who starts the conversation. What matters is who ends the conversation. So keep that in mind. And let's move on to the last thing the last thing that I think people will think about after a breakup, and I'm sure there's more than 3 things that your ex can be thinking about, but these are the 3 most common and most prevalent things that they're probably going through, is this idea of the peak end rule. Now, if you don't know what the peak end rule is, I've talked quite a bit about it throughout my website, my articles, which are on the website, my YouTube channel, my podcast, my products, my coaching sessions. This is a big deal. So what is the peak end rule? Well, the peak end rule basically posits that human beings remember experiences based on the peak of the experience, the most exciting, best part of the experience, and the end of the experience. We don't necessarily think so much about the beginning or, the downhill slope. We think more about the end and the peak when we're remembering experiences. So your ex is probably going through that, and this can even kind of have an interesting synergy between the pendulum thing I was talking about. So imagine this, you've got the pendulum swinging from left to right to left to right. And oftentimes, let's say the left side is when your ex is very excited or thinking and missing you. They're remembering good experiences. They're remembering the peak. They're remembering the best parts of your relationship, and that makes them feel good, right? They're going through these emotions inside. And then, of course, they remember the end, right? And the end was bad, and it makes them feel bad and feel despair, feel hopelessness, and they get depressed, and they swing to the right side, right? So in a weird way, the peak end rule can even inform how they feel from the pendulum. Right. So I feel like sometimes when you get these exes that are going through these kind of strange behavioral changes, it can be due to the peak end rule, due to them thinking of the great parts of the relationship, getting excited, remembering good experiences, feeling good about it, showing that through in their behavior, and then all of a sudden remembering the bad parts and showing that through in their behavior. So that's the peak end rule. And those are the 3 most common things that your ex is going to be thinking if they don't contact you.